Go. Okay, everyone. It's Matt Wiesenfeld here, Toronto native, big Blue Jays fan. Happy to be with Frank this afternoon. It is Tuesday, April the 6th. We are 4 games into the Toronto Blue Jays season, and things are looking good. 3-1 to start, won the first series of the year against the Yankees, took the first game of yesterday's, or the series we're currently in against Texas, which was a bit odd because Texas is doing something wacky and letting all their fans into the game. Which is totally bizarre. As a quick side note, before we get totally off track, they're doing it only for opening day, which I sort of get. But if you can do it safely for opening day, why wouldn't you keep doing it? So it sort of makes me wonder whether they could do it safely or not, or what sort of the incentive is there.
Well, it's funny because one of my dear old friends was in town just a few days ago, and I had a chance to see him for a few days, mask and social distance and everything. And we used to go to opening day for the Cleveland Indians games back when we were kids. His dad would take us. And it was the same kind of concept. Opening day, 80,000 fans. Next day, 5. So it's kind of the same thing. So
yeah, to my mind, it's just weird because if the health and safety part of it. Like I get the idea that if you're going to do it, but if you can literally say we can do it safely for 40 or
one
whatever
day,
people it is for one day, the only thing I can think of, and everything's driven by money, is that maybe they're just blowing their brains out with some extra cost that they don't want to repeat day after day if the interest isn't there. But anyways, the Jays won. Steven Matz made his Toronto Blue Jays debut, looked 1,000 times better than he did when he was with the Mets last year, where I believe Matz had the second highest ERA amongst starters that played what was the equivalent of a full season last year. But he's one of the many guys that the Jays have brought in. He's a veteran. He's a lefty. He looked really good. Like, he threw 6-something innings, struck out a bunch of guys. Facing Texas may not be the best challenge that he's going to see all season. But you got to start somewhere, and he looked really, really good. And I think that's probably a good place to start, just to take a look at the pitching for the Jays in general. Hyunjin Ryu looked really sharp in his debut against the Yankees. The Jays won that game. Quick side note: I was talking with a fellow Jays fan. We were talking about Ryu. Interesting thing about the Dodgers. The Dodgers won the World Series last year, right? And Hyunjin Ryu finishes third in the AL in Cy Young voting, and Kenta Maeda, who was traded from the Dodgers, finished second in the AL in Cy Young voting. So that World Series winning team, hypothetically could have been that much better if they decided to hold on to what they had. But yeah, Ryu looked good. And the pitching's look pretty good so far. Like, I think the starting pitching is going to be the question mark until it's proven after Ryu. We've got a guy named Nate Pearson who throws 1,000 miles an hour but can't stay healthy enough to do it, so he hasn't hit the mound just yet. But overall, the guys have looked good. TJ Zoik is probably a name that most people don't know him. He held the Yankees to 1 run when they won on Sunday. So as long as the Jays pitching is like what I would say average to above average, this team should hit more than well enough to win a lot of games. And again, small sample size, but the bullpens look good too. Julian Merriweather is a name that probably not a lot of people know. He throws about 100 miles an hour. It looks nice and easy coming out of his hand. I believe he was originally acquired when Josh Donaldson was traded to Cleveland a few years back. And yeah, almost everyone that they've put out there has pitched pretty well. But it's early. It's a small sample size. It's just a good start, because I think that's the pitching side of thing is where the question is, do we have enough talent when it comes to pitching? The hitting is unproven too, but it's not because we don't think we have enough talent. We're just not sure if it's ready yet.
You've got a pitching staff that may not be world beaters, but they're veteran enough that you know who you have. With, like you said, with Matz and Pearson and Robbie Ray, you have guys that you know who they are. Whether that's good or bad or not, I don't know, but at least they've been consistently inconsistent or whatever for their career. So you shouldn't be surprised by. The only way you're going to be surprised they do better than what their norm is, which is a positive, I guess, in itself.
Yeah, Ray started off on the DL because the story is that he was holding his kid and he fell down and bruised his elbow. But apparently he'd been looking great in spring training. He has, if you remember from his Arizona, he's got his arm is phenomenal. He's always just struggled with control. And even that, I would say that sometimes, he's one of those guys who can be effectively wild, where he's probably led the majors the last 5 seasons in innings with 2 walks and 3 strikeouts. Like it's the way that he pitches. So I think that if you can get better command, he can be great. But like at the same time, there's going to be some games where he throws 6 innings, strikes out 12, walks 6. And maybe doesn't even give up a hit, because that's just the way that he pitches and the way that he has success. So yeah, it's looking good from that side of it. The lineup, like the hitters, the big thing first of all is like we haven't seen George Springer yet. He again has a minor injury. It's the talk locally is that he might be able to dress for the opener, which will be I guess Thursday. Everyone believes that he's going to be a massive difference maker, and I do too. Not only did he just prove himself in Houston, but he's a winning player. He can lead off sit at the top of that lineup and be the best leadoff hitter in the majors. But the lineups look pretty good too. Like I think the big questions coming in, this year we're going to be all about Vlad Jr. Can he make the progress? He's looked really good. He's slimmer. He's playing decent first base. He has 1 home run, but he's hitting the ball super hard. And he's getting hits. The other piece was Teoscar Hernandez was a big breakout last season. Certainly power-wise, he's already hit a home run this year and looks pretty good. And Marcus Semien, who the Jays picked up, after Springer, so it wasn't really, didn't get as much hype, and it's just a 1-year deal. They're paying him a good amount. He's hit 2 home runs and looked, smooth at second base. So the players are there. Like they should have more than enough offense all throughout the lineup. And it's going to be interesting. Like they probably have too many outfielders. So the speculation is that Randall Grichuk, if he can keep playing well, might be a piece that you could move at some point this season just to get a bit more pitching, whether that's a reliever or a starter, I don't know. But like this team should hit. And the offense should be good enough that there'll be some days where when the pitching's not quite where we want it to be, that it won't make as much of a difference. The other piece I think that'll be interesting is that the field they're going to be playing at in Dunedin, where the spring training facility, TD, I think it's just called TD Field, is supposed to play really, really small. I don't know, lots of the metrics with the new ball and what that's doing for offense. It's very small sample size for that. I was listening to someone on the radio the other day who was saying that home runs are down, but hard contact is up. And if the ball's flying out, the Jays have plenty of guys that can really be a boost for, but it could hurt the pitching at the same time.
Well, I'm looking at something that might be a little bit different from that, because I think you have enough young guys on the rise that they can make adjustments to new ball, new field, new whatever, new lineups. You're looking at between Vlad Jr., Semien, Biggio, and Bichette. Semien's your veteran, and he hasn't been in the league that long. And Springer, even though he may be a veteran of the Astros, it's not like he's 40. So you've got guys that you can put in and out here and there. Grichuk, Hernandez. The thing that I think is interesting about this is you still have Joe Panik on the team, and that idea is you were talking about who's going to play where and you have a little versatility in who gets a day off. If somebody's in a slump, what are you going to do here? I don't think you have that quite in the outfield unless you can convince Grichuk to be that guy, which he's been before. But you have enough depth here where you can play a little bit here and there. Somebody takes a day, not necessarily a platoon, but the younger guys may need a rest. And as we were talking off air, with the travel and the different ways that they're going to do things where they're not going to be at home all the time or at all for a while until we said, mid-May, if we're lucky, that may be necessary to say, just take a mental health day. And you've got a couple of guys that can give them that. So I'm looking forward to that, where you have those options, because let's face it, if it was the baby Blue Jays of last year, who knew what they were going to do? I think they're a little more sustained now.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think it's funny you mentioned Joe Panik, because I think he DH'd the other day. And I think that he probably hasn't DH'd a game since he was 12
right.
I don't want to discredit the guy, because he's played on some World Series winning teams, I think with San Francisco. But like, the idea that he would ever be anyone's ideal
The
DH
DH, right?
is interesting. But you're definitely right. Like they do have enough depth that they can give those days off. They did it the other day with Lourdes Gurriel, who's another great young player, outfielder.
Right.
And Montoyo, the manager, just said, "Look, we're the Texas series was going to be the start of like 16 straight games or something like that." And they have some depth. Like they literally, when you're looking at the the players that they have, it's a little bit different with Springer out, because Springer is a guy who immediately jumps from from not being on the roster into the lineup. But they have depth in the outfield. They have flexibility in the infield because guys like Biggio can play multiple spots across the thing.
Right.
It wouldn't shock me if Semien plays a little bit of shortstop when they want to give Bichette hit the days off that he needs.
Right.
Vlad will certainly DH some days and has already, because they have a guy, a first baseman who's an emerging slugger. I'm not sure what Rowdy Telez's full potential is, but he's definitely a guy who, when he hits the ball, it can go a long way, and he plays a decent first base. So they have the pieces. Like, it was funny. I was talking with someone the other day, and obviously it seems like the Jays and the Yankees are going to be the two best teams in the division, and I think you can never discount the Rays. But I feel like the Yankees. I feel like the Yankees are getting a bump because they're easier to simulate. And by that, I mean, all the players that they've got are players who, if you took their absolute best seasons from their past, are monsters. Judge has hit 50 home runs. Stanton has hit 50 home runs. Kluber's won multiple Cy Young awards. And they've got some other guys too. So I feel like the simulations say, well, maybe we get, 90% of the Giancarlo Stanton from 2017. Whereas all the Jays, like, with the exception, I guess, of Semien and Springer, maybe Ryu, the expectation is that their best seasons are to come. Whether they come this year, nobody knows. But I think it makes it harder for all those like simulator kind of projection models. That's how young some of these guys are. Especially when you look at there's going to be the obvious comparisons between Vlad and his dad, and in addition to being just so physically different, they're different style players, and he might have a better career than his dad, but still might not start on that career.
Right, exactly.
5% bump and hit 45 home runs this season. It's really fascinating to watch, and fun to watch too.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned him and the others, because I was looking at this the other day, and you're looking at three guys whose fathers were phenomenal Major League Baseball players, two in the Hall of Fame, or one will be in the Hall of Fame. And Vlad's not in the Hall of Fame yet, but he just got in. He's got in the last induction, right? Okay, but so they've grown up around the game, but they don't appear to be carbon copies of their fathers, which I think is very interesting. I don't think we ever in our wildest dreams would have seen Dante Bichette playing shortstop. No, I mean, it was like, really, you're going to put him there? Craig Biggio started as a catcher before he moved to second base. Cavan is playing third, moving around, but they don't seem to be the same player, but they have the same DNA, the same swagger, the same genetic makeup. So it'll be interesting to see how they develop as players with that blueprint, but they're going away from that blueprint, which I think is going to be pretty cool.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, like, just even you talk about them not being like their dads, even more so just physically. If Vlad being the most obvious, Vlad Guerrero Sr. was like a sort of a long, strong athlete, whereas, Junior is shorter, heftier, that sort of thing. Bichette, his dad was like a big burly guy. He was, one of those early Rocky sluggers.
Right.
Is a totally different sort of body type. I think Biggio is probably a little bit more athletically like his dad. But certainly the people, I think, forget that Craig Biggio started as a catcher, and when they would back, because he used to play every day, when they used to give him off days, they used to put him in center field. Yep. Because he was such a great athlete, and they just wanted to give his knees sort of a bit of a rest from behind the plate. But is a great point that as obvious as the linkages are in terms of father-son combinations in the major leagues, they all appear to be very different past lives. And I also don't know, I'm trying to think,
well, I'm sorry, I missed a little bit of that. My thing is going for an old Blue Jay, Cecil Fielder, and then Prince comes up, and it's the same guy. He
Yeah.
might be a little bit shorter, but he's the same guy. Same game, same concept. Swing hard, hit ball far, walk around bases. That was the same basic concept. So that's what, I know we all have fathers and we all think, well, I'm not like my dad. But when you make it to the, that's a nice path to go through. And that's a nice thing to have. And you're on, wow, these guys are going to be different, especially when you see pitchers coming up. And I think it's the speculation I have is when I seeing guys, sons who I saw play. Wow. First, I'm thinking a little too much gray hair. I'm getting too old. But it's also the idea of, you didn't have to do this, and you're doing it. And did you grow? The Ken Griffey Jr. thing is always one of the first things that comes to mind. You just jumped in and went, hey, let's do this. I've been around it for my entire life. It's a natural thing. So they've got a step up there. Now, as we're looking at coaching staff and pitching staffs and the pitching coach and all that, what sets them apart from the rest of the American League East, do you think?
What sets the Jays apart? I think there's a couple of things that come to mind. I think one is like as we talked before, like their depth is really good. I think that if you look at, if you're comparing them against the other, top teams in the American League or even just, teams in general, they're winning at a lot more positions than they did a few years ago. Like it got really lean after the 2015, 2016 teams that were led by Josh Donaldson and Batista, whatever, even though it doesn't seem like that long ago, but it got pretty lean pretty quick.
Right.
And now, and if you just go around, the diamond, like start at first base, how many teams have a better first baseman than Vlad Guerrero Jr.? Maybe a few. Semien, again, maybe there's a few other second basemen that you might want more than you might want Marcus Semien, but it's probably going to be a shrinking number if he keeps hitting the way he has. If you're talking about like, there's lots of great shortstops in the league right now, as far as, like the Lindors and Trevor Story and Seager, but that's already like, I would say like a generation ahead of where Bichette is in terms of age.
Exactly.
So I'm not sure, other than a guy like Tatis, I'm not, who just got hurt, sadly. I'm not sure there's another 21, 22-year-old shortstop that players might, or teams might want more than what the Jays have. Third base is a little bit different. Like Biggio, I think, I was trying to come up with a comp when I was talking to someone the other day. I think Biggio, if things break right, I don't think he'll be as good as his dad, which is, is not a slight. His dad's a Hall of Fame. But I think if things break right for him, he could be a lot like a guy like Ben Zobrist, where, Zobrist was a key player for the Rays. I think he was on that Chicago World Series team that won it all. And I look at it like where, no team, at least in the majors, probably that had Zobrist ever said, well, the reason we suck is because we have Zobrist, right? Like he's filling a need, he's getting a few hits, he's playing good defense, we're moving him around. We may always be wanting to look for like a superstar to replace him, but he's never going to be the reasons why we're falling behind other teams. So I think Biggio could, if things kind of break the way they want to, like have that kind of career. There's always a job kind of for him, kind of thing.
Right.
And I think with the outfielders, again, Springer hasn't played yet. If they really like maximize the playing time the way that they could through the DH and things like that, like you could have 4 outfielders that all have, 25 plus home runs. Like they all have the talent to do it. In the case of, I'm trying to think, they've all done it before, I think, over a full season. Maybe not Gurriel, because he's been a bit in and out, and last year he was playing really well, but a short year. So yes, like there's talent there all around. Like I think it's actually, the Jays might not have, like, I don't know, depending on where you like Springer, I'm not sure if Springer's a top 10 outfielder. Maybe he's not like a Ronald Acuna Jr. kind of type as far as, or Mike Trout, but I'm not sure there's a team that has a better collection of outfielders than the Jays do right now. And they're all, pretty young. They should be healthy. They should play. Catcher's a bit of a weak spot, at least hitting wise. Danny Jansen hasn't done much. Alejandro Kirk's still pretty unproven, but they can catch the ball. They're not, they're not, no one's worried about, the pitching staff's not worried because they're not sure what's going to happen back there. So I think like it's that side by side. Like I think more so, than in other sports, because of the way that baseball is played. Like you can easily kind of go position by position and sort of see where a strength is. Because, you know, in other sports like basketball being the, you know, the most classic, if you have a LeBron James or a Michael Jordan or one of these truly elite players, you know, it transcends, you know, the actual talent and strengths of those other.
Right.
You know, Mike Trout, as awesome as he is, and he may go down as being the best player of the last, you know, millennium, who knows? He's made the playoffs once and they never won a game. Like it's just one of those things. So I think like the Jays, they just match up really well. And, you know, I think the Yankees are not going to be as good as people think, or as healthy as people think. I don't know what to make of the Rays. Like the Rays, like it shouldn't work, but it keeps working. I think that their offense eventually has to kind of run out of something, because I'm not sure where they get it from.
Where they're getting it from, right? Yeah, right.
And then you just look at the competition, like so that's the AL East quickly. I don't think there's a team in the West, even though Houston and Oakland might be solid. I don't think those teams are better than what the Jays have in a general sense, broadly. Chicago's intriguing, but they already lost a player for the season in Jimenez, and you know they have enough offense. I don't think that's going to be the reason why they, you know, are doing the class. And they're stronger probably on the mound, at least in the starting rotation, than the Jays are, because they've got some veteran guys that are really good. But it's a long season, you know. Lance Lynn is good, I guess, but if you told me that Lance Lynn was, you know, instead of being 15-10 was 12-12, I wouldn't be shocked. And if he goes 12-12, maybe that team's just, you know, an 86 win team and not a 97 win team. Like there's nothing where I think that they've put together this super team the way that, you know, the Dodgers have, or the way that the Padres seem to have, kind of thing. So I think it's just going to be really competitive. I think you've got a lot of teams that can win between 85 and 95 games, and the Jays are right in there with them.
Well, I'm looking at it. I don't see a staff that has an ace and an ace and an ace. Whereas you used to be able to, you know, the old Braves teams, like, wait a second, you just put in Maddox, but tomorrow we have Smoltz, and then the day after Glavine, and wait a second, and their fourth starter will be a second or first starter someplace else. Like, this is crazy. And we've seen those staffs here and there. I don't see that in the American League. I see it in the National League. I don't see it in the American League. So you're going to get a soft touch comparatively once or twice a week. You're going to get somebody that you can go, we can touch this guy up. Whereas I don't think you're going to have that in the National League. And to touch on something you said about George Springer, it's an interesting thought that it's somebody that until they started winning World Series and then they started throwing money at him, you didn't really appreciate what he did for the whole. He plays some decent center field, he gets on base, he's no great shakes. Then you go back and look at the numbers, and you go back and look at how many runs he scored, how many runs he drove in, and then you go, okay, and he hit a few homers, and he did this, like he plays Gold Glove caliber center field. Wait a second, this guy's a lot better than I thought he was, you know, and the Jays happy. And I know they spent a pretty penny for him, but that's where they're at. And you mentioned Mike Trout. You know, you've got maybe how many center fielders in the American League you're going to say are better than George Springer?
Yeah, no, the thing you can't take away from Springer, and not that we're trying to build him up here anyway, is like he's proven he's better in the playoffs than he is during the regular season.
Right.
So
exactly.
He's not like a Mark Lemke type who was hitting 220 for for the Braves and made a couple of big hits. You know, like he's an all-star level player who, when the playoffs have come, he's been, you know, just as big a part of teams that won a World Series, you know, however you want to look at the whole cheating thing and whatever. It's like, he's like, I didn't come here to lose. So like, I'm going to come. Right. I'm not like, I don't think, and I don't know him personally, obviously, like, I don't think Donaldson is the kind of guy who's just going to like, you know, hold teammates' hands when they're struggling and like, let's talk it out. He's a guy who has baseball talent. He's a guy who I think actually worked quite hard to get where he was, because his career didn't sort of start from the time he was 21. He had to get a bit of a late start, and he's super intense, and he wants that intensity he wants other people to match his intensity. And if you're trying to do it, then that's great. I think Springer's probably doesn't run quite as hot as Donaldson does, But I think
Right.
it's a similar aspect of saying like, hey, I'm used to winning, and I'm used to like me being a part of that winning, and I need you guys to do what you do. If you do what you do, I will do my part. Don't worry about me. And I think that is always like, there are these players that come through that usually wind up being like pretty talented in their own right, but they're players who are winners. Like it's not rocket science. Like you see it in all sports. There's players that have all-star, Hall of Fame careers and never play for a winner. And I think that that's not always all their fault, but to some extent you're like, well, why is this not happening? Why is your brilliance not having some kind of a network effect once in a while?
And the beauty of it is you have a proven winner who has all these young guys around him who also have a pretty decent idea of what a major league locker room is about, because they've been in and out of them as little kids. Gurriel played with his brother. So it's like, hey, if he says something, listen to him. If he does something, do what he says. So I think they're in a good spot. And I think there's also a down year for the National League East. Or I'm sorry, American League East. Yeah, I said it right the first time. I won't even throw dirt on the Orioles. We won't even go there. But that's just a bad thing to say. It's just they're just in that situation. Like I said, the Rays, exactly what you said, they have to come back to earth at some point, somehow, some way. And I think the big thing was the Blake Snell thing. Oh. I mean, that was when you just change we can do anything because we do it right to what were you guys thinking? And then when he walked, I'm like, all right, that's just, it's got to dig in there someplace. It's just, there's got to be something that this turns wrong. You mentioned the Yankees. I've probably been saying this for 40 years, but the Yankees just aren't, they're the Yankees. But they're the Yankees. There has to be a point where you go, you can only throw money at stuff so often, and it doesn't pan out. And you mentioned health. If they could be all be healthy at the same time, that's one thing. But, Kluber only is going to pitch once every 5 days. They can only hit so many home runs, and we're trying to dial that down. And how many games is Stanton going to play? How many games is Judge going to play? Yeah. What are you going to do here? What are you going to do there? Hicks, how many, so you start to get to the point where you're like, it shouldn't work out as well as it does. Red Sox, I think the Red Sox could be good, but they could also be awful.
Well, they're not off to a good start, that's for sure.
No, they're not. That's for sure, right?
They still have no pitch. It's actually been an interesting, more so than Baltimore, because Baltimore, wants to sort of like tore it down to the studs and is hopeful that they can try and build it back up. But with the Red Sox, like, they are just not even competitive. Like it's been really quite astounding. Like, yes, they've had injuries, Sale and Rodriguez and pitching. Like it's just been wild for a team that maybe no one's in the stratosphere of the way the Yankees and the Dodgers spend money, but the Red Sox were like right there in that next tier of saying, if there's money to be spent, we will spend it. And things have turned because
and then it just dried up.
Yeah, and that's the reason Mookie Betts is in LA and not in Boston, which he can't pitch. So that's only takes him so far. But if you're a believer, and it seems reasonable that he's a top 10, maybe top 5 player in the league, you just had to pay him. That's all you had to do. You just had to work out a deal with a player who had already established himself as an elite level player. This wasn't the Tatis deal where you're like, well, we're pretty sure, but he hasn't even played a full season yet.
Right.
You had to say, what's it going to take? 10 years, $300 million. You give him the same kind of deal that Bryce Harper got or Machado got, and then he's your guy. But they didn't want to do it, which is fine, because I'm not sure anyone's worth that kind of money. But that aside, but they didn't want to do it, and then the signing David Price was like a disaster, which they're able to get out of, but they have no pitching and their offense is on the downside. It's really quite astounding, because the way things are looking right now, and I know the Orioles swept them in that first series, like if this gets into May or June and the pitching still is abysmal, like I'm not sure they finish above Baltimore, because as bad as
it's
that
possible,
Baltimore
right?
team is, they're bad, but they're going to win 39-40% of their games. And the Red Sox might not be able to do that much better than that. So it's really kind of interesting.
Well, it's, the thing that I find really weird, you mentioned Mookie Betts. At the Red Sox, let me see if I put this the right way. I believe they print more money than the Padres do. So if the Padres can afford Tatis, the Red Sox should be able to afford Betts.
Yeah.
Now, whether you want to do that or not, that's another story. But you look at, what was one of the best young outfields for a while, going back to Lynn Rice and Dwight Evans. And you go, and that's going back a ways. With Bradley, Benintendi, and Betts, that should have been together for another 5-6 years, and you wouldn't have to worry about anything. Health, okay, but usually their health. Benintendi got banged up a little bit, but usually they're fairly healthy. They can hit, they can throw, they can run, they can, whatever you needed from an outfield, that's it. You didn't have to worry about that for a while. And then fill in the infield as you go. But I looked at that game you were mentioning the other day and like, who are these guys? And it's my job to know. And I'm like, I don't know who's on this roster,
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, and I saw Benintendi playing with the Royals the other day. I'm like, oh, that's right. He's not there anymore. He's not there anymore. And you look around the league and all the guys are playing someplace else. Oh my heavens. Who? And as you said, they used to spend as much money as anybody, if not more. And then suddenly went, we're not spending any more money at all. And they're not spending money on anything. I would be surprised if you have to clean your own seat if you go into the dugout, it's insane. So yeah, I don't know what they're doing, and everyone does things differently and they do it for reasons. I get that. But when you took down the evil empire and you know what? That was good enough. That's what it feels like to me. Yeah. We reached the peak, we took them down, and it was good enough.
Yeah, no, comparing them with the Padres is sort of interesting, especially because like there's the juxtaposition with the Dodgers and the Yankees, and someone being that next team. Although in the case of the Padres, it's even more fascinating because it seemed to kind of just turn in one offseason, right? Like Tatis Jr. is maybe like a generational player, hopefully if he can stay healthy. You're like, okay, we can get this Manny Machado guy who mess around with Tatis's extension. Eric Hosmer's making too much money, but it's not my money, so who cares?
Right.
The trades, like trading you Darvish, trading for Blake Snell, like those are like, if you were starting a team from scratch and didn't have any of those other things, and someone said, hey, you could start off by having these two pitchers, you'd be like, well,
okay.
Minor league pipeline, so maybe there's some talent coming, but like not to the level of getting back to the days like a Vlad Jr., who was the number one prospect in Major League Baseball for a 24-month period, and it was just a matter of when. And it was sort of interesting too because like those teams, it's interesting the way that teams spend money, because like the Padres are the greatest example. They signed Machado to this massive deal. Free agent, you're on the market, he's still relatively young, he's just hitting his prime, you spend all that money. Then they do a totally different thing, spending even more money on Tatis, which is we're buying out all these free agent years ahead of the time, and we're making this massive long-term commitment, which they could have waited 3 seasons to do, to be honest.
Right.
It was as much a statement as it was a financial commitment, that you sign them to these massive contracts well before you have to. Like, those guys have so much financial leeway, Boston, New York, but they seem to never do it. Like Judge is not sitting on a 7-year, $300 million contract. They never did that for him. They paid Cole a lot of money, and it's money well spent. He might be the best pitcher in baseball, depending on the day. But they just don't seem to like either they never love their guys enough to do it, which Betts would have seemed to be the guy to do it with based on his early career performance. But why didn't Judge get a deal like that? Here's what basically a rookie.
Well, what I think it is with the Padres, and I think you're going to see it with the quote unquote smaller market teams, they had to make a statement to their fan base. New ownership, has to say, we're going to do something. And this is the thing. Machado, you're going to be here. And they convinced him to move from short to third, which, that was the sticking point all along, with Baltimore, with the Dodgers. And before Tatis even came up, he said, You willing to move to third? Well, for this guy, yeah. Now I'm reading between the lines a little bit, but that's what I'm assuming.
Yep.
Then Hosmer said, we're this is it. You are a popular player. You've been in the World Series with the Royals. Blah 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 blah. Boom. We went out and got Yu Darvish, who you don't know which Yu Darvish you're going to get, but when you get one of them, usually it's pretty good.
Yep.
Blake Snell comes off of a phenomenal season and all of that. And the thing, if you don't want to let him pitch, we'll let him pitch. Boom. We're making a statement with our fan base. We're not moving any place. This is it. I think with the Yankees, I think that's the Yankees saying, we're going to go out and we're going to spend money on our pitching like we always do. But if we have to go do something about Judge, we'll let him walk and go get somebody else. We brought Stanton in because we were able to. They don't have to have those guys, and the Yankees fans are still going to be Yankees fans. So that's my take on it. And then what they used to do was they groom the farm system guys to be traded to bring in guys from other teams and spend money on free agents. So, that I think that's their way of looking at it. We don't have to keep Aaron Judge. It would be great if we could, and we'll kind of spin it to where he wants to go look at greener pastures. But now he may be an exception because he's one I think they have to keep. But other guys, well, we'll keep him if we can. If we can't, as long as we've got a couple arms, we're good.
Yeah, no, it's like it's going to be really interesting, and the Jays are going to be in a similar spot, maybe not necessarily where the Padres are now, but where they're going to have to make a call or two on who are have the players shown enough. And I think the one thing I would say about the Tatis deal that I think is maybe doesn't get reported enough is the idea of when you wait, you sort of at the same time say you don't actually believe in it. So if you're telling yourself that if this guy is healthy, because health is always a factor for sure,
right,
that he is going to be a top 10 player, top 5 player, top 2 player, whatever, then there really isn't as much impetus to wait, even though because the way that the contracts are structured, they're all structured where you're not paying all that up front, it gets averaged out a little bit and that sort of thing. So if you really believe in the player, then you should do, which is why it's kind of fun and exciting when these young guys get these deals. It's when those players, and then maybe this is what the Red Sox did with Mookie Betts is that they didn't quite believe it. They didn't quite believe that a guy with his size, his stature, could do what he did and do it long term. And if you don't believe it, then of course you should, make the deal and let him go. The problem is it becomes pretty obvious when you're wrong under those situations. Most fans, I think, would rather you gamble the money and be wrong than to, pass on the player and be wrong on that from that approach. Because it becomes not about money. It's not an Oakland situation where they're just, eventually Giambi becomes too expensive and eventually Tejada becomes too expensive, and the fans just see it coming. They may not know when. Sometimes it's a season earlier or a season later than you think. But everyone knew that those early Moneyball teams, that some of those players that were the elite players weren't going to be there forever. Zito, Giambi, Tejada, basically they didn't keep any of them any longer than they could afford them. So it becomes an interesting thing, but you have to be willing to. I didn't even think of it's not even cost savings or whatever. It's just saying how are you going to get another player like that? You're better off going with the guy that you have all the medical history, all the emotional capital. You know everything about his neighbor's dog that you could. Whereas, if you do the opposite, which is when Bryce Harper going from Washington to Philadelphia, they played them, so many times a year. So they're very familiar with the player, but everything that you're learning what you really need to learn is in that free agent carousel kind of moment of, it's like a job interview. You tell people what they want to hear. I always dreamed about being a Philly. It was the team I rooted for growing up, but all that kind of stuff. Whereas if you just sign your guys, and usually if you do it sooner than later, it costs you less if they are the players you think they are. But that's the thing. Yeah, there's risk. So that maybe that's the thing with Boston is they don't feel like they have.
Let's look at this way. Well, Right. Well, the thing that I'm looking at, and you mentioned 42-year-old Albert Pujols still playing, or would the Angels rather have 42-year-old Albert Pujols still playing, or however old it is? Because he built up equity with the Cardinals. If they had signed him to that deal, they still would have went, we can figure out something to do with Albert. You know, he's not going to be an albatross around our neck. Whatever we do, we can have him play a couple games. Oh, performing well at the plate, but he had a play at first base the other day where a simple pickoff play, ball just went right to his legs, and he just looked at it like, I don't know what. I mean, he was upset, but that's a play he would have made a few years ago. But you know, he's got that contract on. You know, so the idea being, and you mentioned perfect with the A's. When the Royals won, they didn't try and keep all that together. We showed you we built a win. Our way of doing things was to get to the championship game with this group of people, but it's not sustainable. The White Sox, we got there, we're done. There's nothing else we can do from a few years ago. We got to the World Series, the game. That's why we're talking about the Rays, thinking, is this sustainable? You know, because you can't keep throwing money at guys that you weren't throwing money at before. You know, like as you mentioned, can you throw money at Jambi? Is he a top 5 player in the league? Tejada? I don't know. Hosmer? You know, are these guys that you want to throw money at? Maybe they are, but maybe they're not. Now let's go spend money on guys that we weren't willing to spend money on before. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to see that you have the Blue Jays, to try and bring this full circle, that they've got them in place now. This is a young team that has most of the people in place, it looks like, from what, as we ran down the roster, that this is a good 3 or 4 year project with this team. But knowing the Blue Jays, they'll blow it up if they have to. And they can always bring a couple of guys in if need be. But I think they're in a good spot.
No, I think they're in a great spot. There was something like, obviously now is the time where everyone's writing, you know, their articles about predictions for the season and that sort of stuff. And it's interesting to read. And most of the stuff is saying that the Jays are probably the second place team in the AL East and they're likely to make the playoffs. One writer, and I can't remember who, so I can't attribute it, I apologize, it was saying that, you know, one of his bold predictions was that the Brewers were going to trade Josh Hader, which seems likely because they don't want to pay a lot of money for that specific relief pitcher, and that they might trade him to the Jays. And I think if that one move happens, it really gets interesting, because not because the Jays have a terrible bullpen there. I would say their bullpen is, let's call it above average. But what we've seen in the playoffs the last even like 5-7 years is like that one elite bullpen arm, if deployed properly. And it happened against the Jays a couple of years ago when Andrew Miller was with the Indians and at the height of his powers.
I was going to say, right.
You know, it can really make a massive difference in a few weeks of the playoffs. And I think that's, you know, Hader has proven over his, you know, career that he can be super dominant. I get that the Brewers, you know, just probably can't afford at whatever they think the going rate is for him. But whoever gets him is I think going to really be, you know, like primed, assuming that it goes to a winning team. And the thing about him too is like he's also pitched in the playoffs. Like this is not some rookie who's, you know, amazing stuff and has never pitched in a big game. They've made the playoffs the last 3 seasons. And if that, I was just thinking, like, if that transaction came through, and I don't know what the Jays would have to give up either off the current roster or future, whatever, to get him, it would really be interesting to see how they would match up with the other teams that they would have to beat, having, you know, not only the team that they've got, but then also going into the series, like we also have the best relief pitcher on any of these teams that we're competing with now. So
what I think is interesting about that, and you went to the Andrew Miller, which I was going to do. When you do that, when you make that move, and it's not for the closer and it's not for the starter, and we know that the game is different than it used to be 10 years ago, that guy, that dominant guy in the middle innings, maybe as important, if not more important, because you're getting him in earlier and basically you're saying it's a 4-inning game and then we're bringing in the bullpen, which is a great thing to do if you can do that. but I still don't know if we know the value of that guy. Maybe the teams do, but I don't know that we do monetarily, because you pay for the guy and then you get a few weeks, a few months, maybe a season, maybe two, and then is he still the same dominant guy? For some reason, I always go back, and we're going to the closer, but I always go back to the Eric Gagne dominance with the Dodgers. And like, this guy's lights out. He's great. And is he still pitching?
Mm.
I mean, it went from being almost unhittable to not even being on a roster or K-Rod or somebody. It's like, these guys are insane. And then either they were figured out or their arms fell off or they're overused or whatever. How do you value that in your payroll, in your buildup of what you do? Is it better to you that you're trying to develop one of them in the minors, or they come through and they're on the roster? Like Hader, we knew nothing about him until we knew something about him. It's like suddenly this guy is unbelievable. 2 weeks ago, we didn't even know who he was. So you wonder where do you plug that into your planning? And I guess you can go get him from Milwaukee and bring him in, that's great. But what do you value as far as what you give away to get him?
I think the interesting thing about Hader and again those other guys is because every once in a while, and Miller, I guess, was the case that's like they will get paid. You know, to some extent, you know, whether it's more or less. I think the interesting thing about those players is it's their deployment. So these guys spend all season long, you know, don't pitch them on back-to-back days. Don't bring them in when there's a runner on base. And then the managers or the teams get greedy and you know, I don't want to say overpitch them in the playoffs, but like now there's no situation where you can't bring this guy in. You know,
right.
Third inning, bases loaded kind of thing. And I think you know, like what gets lost in the regular season stuff of it is like, if that's the way you want to use them, I don't know why they actually pull back during the regular season, the same way that they pull back with the starter saying we don't want to have them pitch too early. Like, you don't always know when there's going to be another situation like the game that you're in. So if it's you know, the second week of the season and it's bases loaded and you know, whoever's coming up to the plate, you want your best guy out there whether he pitched yesterday or not, because that can be the difference between winning that game. You may go the next 2 weeks and never have a game that's closer than 4 runs. Either you're up or you're down. So it's like, I think that people kind of get a little bit lost on how to pay guys, because getting into the playoffs is never guaranteed. And then they look at it saying, well, this guy's going to only give me 70 great innings potentially over the course of a major league season. And probably half of those are going to be random. Oh, he hasn't pitched in a few days. Probably put him out there. You know, kind of thing. And I think that's why the quantification parts, then you get into this thing of like, you know, so I think there can be definitely like a fatigue thing of, you know, if you pitch a guy 11 days in a row, there's going to be, you know, something's going to happen. But I think that like, whether it's Hader, whether it's Miller, whether it's things like that, like, you know, one of the probably most overrated / underrated players of a generation is like Mariano Rivera. You know, if you needed a guy to pitch only the 9th inning and only, you know, a clean inning, there's nobody who's ever done it better.
Right.
You know, and he benefited from the fact that he always played on good teams, so there was lots of save opportunities for him to rack up that statistic.
And he had guys in front of him, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't mean that as a dig against him because he was elite, but you know, like it was like the deployment of him was so strategic and very singular in how they used him. But whereas now, like that person, like if that player existed today, they would be, if they were that good, they would be used differently. But like I just think that, like, you know, why they don't do it more, like use the regular season as more of a training ground for the playoffs, where you say, hey, you know what, if the Brewers are playing the Cubs and it's middle of May, and there's 3 1-run ball games in a row, then we want to win all those 3 ball games. We got a series against the Pirates and then the Orioles next, and we probably won't have a close game for 2 weeks. Like why not actually like rest him in a real way, rather than worry about like, oh, do we get an extra pitch here, according to the the analytical aspect of things. Like it's that whole, like, to a lesser extent, it's a different kind of strategy. Like this 3 times through the order kind of a thing that all these teams get to, going back to the Snell piece and things that like if you want the stats to tell you something, if you want the stats to tell you to take a guy out of the game,
there you go.
The stats will tell you to do it.
Right.
Because generally speaking, almost no pitchers are getting better the more pitches and more batters they face in a game. So whether it's a relief pitcher facing 2 guys or a starter facing 20, they're almost all, losing some degree of effectiveness.
Well, the thing about Mariano Rivera, you say, well, how did he get that job? Well, he took it from John Wetland when Wetland retired. So he was the setup guy, and they had it set up perfectly. You pitch the 7th, maybe the 7th and 8th, you pitch the 9th. And this is the way we're going to do it, whether it is, April, June, August, we're going to do this the same way. So when we get to the World Series or the playoffs, boom, boom, boom. And as we know, or as we assume, or the phrase is, players are creatures of habit. When you know what those habits are, it makes it a lot easier. So that's a good thing. I will go back to the Shohei Ohtani start from yesterday. Whereas, and it's kind of hard to use Joe Madden as an example because you don't know where his head is half the time, which is a good thing. I think it's a good thing, but he doesn't do things conventionally. Ohtani was up after hitting a home run and hitting a bomb and then throwing 101 the next inning. It's just insane. But his last inning was kind of falling apart. Not necessarily because of him, but just things weren't going too well. I think he was up 3-0 and or they were up 2-0, 2-0, 2-0, 3-0, something like that. And I think what Madden said was, I'm going to leave him in until he can get the win. Because the announcer's saying, well, it's time for him to come out, it's time for him to come out, it's time for him to come out. It's like, we're still in the lead. Let's let him close the door, get through this inning. And then obviously, the play at the plate where he got cut down and clean play. It wasn't like he was a cheap shot or anything. And now you have to say, well, is he hurt? Should he have been in the game? He's an athlete. It happens. It could have happened in the first inning. It could happen in the 9th inning. It doesn't make a difference to me as far as I'm concerned. But I think what Joe Madden said was, this is how we're going to play this. I have him in the game to pitch. I also have his bat in the game. If I take him out from pitching, I don't have his bat in the game. So I've got to make multiple switches and do multiple things. And it gets rid of some of the things I can do later on in the game if something else happens. At least that's my take on it. And plus, he's still pitching well, and he might be able, and we want to see what happens if he has to get out of a jam. He hasn't pitched in a year. Let's see what happens if he's in a jam. What can he do to get out of a jam? So I thought it was pretty cool. But most managers would have went, yeah, well, you got a man on first and blah, 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 and then pitch count, and they would yank him out of there without finding out what you could do. And I thought it was pretty impressive. They said, at least again, my take was, let's see what he's going to do. Then we can, it's only the 3rd game of the year or whatever it is. Unless it comes down to the wire, this game doesn't really mean a lot other than we can find out what our guy can do. So I think to your point was, I think sometimes coddle's not the word, but we don't extend the guys to find out what they can do, especially our starters now. You get in trouble. Oh my goodness, you get in trouble. Well, let's see what he does when he's in trouble. Because as you said, in the World Series, he's going to be in there unless you're the Rays.
Well, I think what the fascinating thing too about the dollars and cents of it all is when you pull back your starters, like, why are you paying them so much money?
Right. Right.
And I know that you're paying, that's a very glib way of putting it, but wouldn't you, if the Yankees are going to be in a jam, and it's late in a game, wouldn't you rather have Garrett Cole, who hypothetically, somewhat justifiably, you decided to make the highest paid pitcher in the game when you gave him that contract, to pitch that and to,
right.
Win or lose with the guy that you said versus a young fireballer who, on that particular pitch, maybe he can get it up to 99 and Cole hasn't thrown 97 since the 4th inning or whatever it happens to be. But in reality, it wouldn't be a shock if 3 seasons from now that guy is bagging groceries. Like, that's
Right.
the way that some of these players are dispensable and flame out and those kinds of things. Like, so it's an interesting dynamic of like, what are you paying for? Because we don't have like a system. Sometimes I marvel about what goes on in soccer, because in soccer you can be in these like Champions Leagues and things like that with an entirely different set of players than you got to qualify for it. But that's not the way that baseball works, or any of the major North American sports work. Like, there's a point at which your team is your team and you can't add to it. And you gotta go with what you want to go, which is, so, and in the case of like getting back to Snell, because Snell is like this tipping point for all these discussions, it was less of a financial decision there, because even, Snell's making a good amount of dough, but he hasn't cashed in like the way that Cole has, or some other guys, not yet. But like I said, like, who do you want to win or lose with? And like the fact that Snell was pitching, one of the greatest, playoff games in the last 25 years is almost even somewhat secondary. Even if he'd just been pitching well for him, like, good for Snell is striking out a bunch of guys, go 5-6 innings, only give up a run or two. Like, that wouldn't have been a shock. He was pitching better than that, but that, that kind of a game wouldn't have been a surprise based on what we've seen from his career. But, a computer program said, the percentages are this, and I think that like that's like, it gets lost in, like in translation a little bit. Like, it's like a classic case of, to jump sports a little bit, don't you want Michael Jordan taking the last shot? Like, doesn't that give you your best chance of winning? Even though in some very critical moments he's made the pass and other players have hit the shot, you don't want to make that the norm, where he's expecting to be able to just dish the ball off and live with that. Part of the reason you pay, and part of the reason some players stand out and build Hall of Fame careers, is because in situations where they might be a bit tired, or they might be fatigued, or more importantly, like, forgetting that, in situations where others don't succeed, they can and they do at a rate that's higher than Levin. Michael Jordan didn't make every shot, didn't make every game-winning shot, but he certainly made enough of them that he, could justifiably take every one of them till the end of time. And you got to live with the results, because who are you going to say you want to take the shot? So I think that like, baseball is slightly different, but like, it's the same concept. Like, what's the point of developing elite players where in the one situation, like, you actually have control? Like, do we want the guy who's in the game to pitch this guy or somebody else? It's not the hitting thing. The hitting thing's a little bit harder, because your best players are probably already in the game. When it comes to pitching, like, you had the choice. He was in. You didn't have to do anything. You chose to do it, and therefore, I'll give them credit. Like, they seem to be more than comfortable living with it. And I know they talk about, like, they talk about on it was actually on a recent Raptors broadcast. They were talking about Pascal Siakam, because he's had a bunch of opportunities to hit game winners that have not connected this season. The Raptors played a ton of close games, and they kept saying on the broadcast, and I'll give them credit for saying it. So, like, look, everyone can win with taking and making the shot. It's some players don't have either the self-confidence or the team confidence to take those chances and fail, and have it not be, precipitous in terms of their play for the next game or the next week, or in sometimes it's like their career. Like, we've seen players who have made, honest to goodness mistakes in the moment, and and their careers have unraveled after that. Not everyone has the mental makeup to do it. So, like, getting back to the Snell example, that didn't appear to be the case. Maybe he wasn't going to get him out, but he didn't seem to be wavering emotionally. And he definitely didn't seem to be, losing anything. But they made the choice, and, it didn't work. But like, it was one of the things, like, where even if it did work, like, is it the right choice? That I think is always like the crux of it too.
Well, I make the comparison, or not the comparison, but I use the reference of the old Johnny Carson show before the Tonight Show. Who do you trust? There is the key right there. They showed him that they don't trust him. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's it. That you can't make it any more clear than that. You don't trust me to get the out that we need after the game I've pitched. You don't trust me to get the out that we need. You're going to bring in somebody else. Not that someone else can't do it, but you told me I'm the man. You've shown me I'm the man. And when it's time for me to be the man, you go, not today, son. I know you're pitching a great game, but no. So I can see that. And I can see that happening in a lot of different places where people go, I got to run. I can't deal with this anymore. I want them to believe in me as much as I believe in myself and I believe in them. And this is the thing I think where they said with the Padres said with Machado, with Hosmer, with Tatis, excuse me, that we trust you. We might not have a reason to, but we trust you. Money at you, and we're going to sink or swim with you. You are the franchise now. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. But my thing with a pitcher is, and this is something that I may be prejudiced against this because I thought this for years, you don't make a big investment on a pitcher unless you know, unless you absolutely know, unless they've gone through the wars and they've Verlander, for example. Okay, injuries, a little bit. He's durable for most of his career, big deal, and then he's not going to pitch a lot this year. You can't pay for a pitcher not to pitch, and at some point, a pitcher's not going to be able to pitch, and it's nothing you can actually gauge. You can't predict it. It could be today. It could be, Nolan Ryan is the exception.
Yeah.
But at one point, he couldn't pitch again. You go, okay, no, yeah, you don't know. You don't know. I mean, offensive players, they may get dinged here and there. You move them to DH, but a pitcher, you just don't know as a starting pitcher. So my thing is always, you don't put the big money for a starting pitcher. If it gets to the point where it's crazy, Garrett Cole, he may have another 5-6 years in it. He may have another 2 weeks. And though I don't like what the Indians have done by moving all of their Cy Young Award winners someplace else in the last few decades, but you can say they didn't spend money on a guy that couldn't pitch anymore.
Yeah.
How many more years did Cliff Lee have after he left? Well, he had a few good years in Philly. Okay. Sabathia about another decade and a half. Okay. So it's a crapshoot. You don't know, but it's a hard thing. So, Bauer's gone, Kluber's gone. How long are they going to keep Bieber? Clevenger's gone, who was almost a Cy Young winner the other year.
Yeah, Carrasco.
Did they have another 6 or 7? Right. Yeah. If they have another 6 or 7 good years, you made the wrong decision, but that's the way it is with arms. So, well, I want to leave it at this because I think we covered more than we said we were going to cover, and I don't want a prediction. I know it's too early for that.
Never.
But just as I think it is, but just as a general idea, what do you think of the changes that have been made as far as the ball and other things? And what do you think that the future holds for baseball this season?
I thought we were going to go with more specific Jays predictions. I think when it comes to the ball, and again, I was listening to something the other day where they were doing, it was super early data because there had only been 2 days of the major league season out of a long season. And it was saying that the hard hit rate is up but the ball isn't carrying as well as it has. And I think that there's 2 interesting things of that. One is there's some very direct statistical correlations that the harder the ball's hit, the more likely it is to be a hit. I think it's if it goes over 100 miles an hour exit velocity, I hate using that term. It's 61% of the time it finds the grass somewhere or leaves the park, kind of thing. So I think that if those numbers are holding and we're getting more doubles and triples than homers and strikeouts, I think that makes for a more exciting game. I don't know if that's going to be the case also because you have to factor in to some extent, weather. There are games that have already been postponed. Right. The weather in the Northeast is what it is. So I think we just need more data on what that's really going to look like. It'll be an interesting season. It always is. I think some of the interesting parts of last year about the pandemic, I think will start to sort of subside a little bit. I don't think we're going to be quite forgetting about it, but we saw the Rangers put fans in their stands. Some teams are doing it to lesser capacity. We've already had a COVID cancellation. So, the fact that, but at the same time, there are going to be more, like, I know in the NBA they've already started, but some players in some sports are starting to get vaccinated. I think things are still going to be weird in terms of restrictions and travel and what you can do, and Zoom interviews instead of face-to-face interviews. Like, things are still going to be pretty weird for at least this season, but I think they're going to start to normalize, and I think it's going to be an interesting year. I think the Padres Dodgers thing is going to be hopefully interesting.
Right.
I'm on the in Eastern time zone, so it'll maybe sort of adjacent to what my day to day is, because the games just start and end late, and you don't get the same buzz like when you're watching, because I watch a lot of Jays games. When you see the score come across the bottom, and you're like, the Dodgers are winning again. When you check the box score the next morning, it doesn't resonate the same way as when you sort of see that.
Right.
But I think the Jays are in for a good race. I think the American League does not have a singular dominant team. So I think there's going to be a lot of jockeying for position there. And I think the National League is the East could be a real beast. Like, Philly got off to they swept the Braves to start the season, which, again, it's one series, but if that team is pretty good, and the Mets, they've only played one game at this point, but they lost it. But there's expectation that they could be good. So you could have 3, maybe 4 teams that are really, in that hunt. I don't know what the NL Central. I feel like the NL Central might, have just one over 500 team, and that's it. And it could be a bit bleak and bland. Maybe that's the best way to put it. It's just a bland division in terms of who's in there, and the Cardinals. Could the Cardinals win again with 84 wins like they did? They won the year they won the World Series 20 years ago, whatever that was. I could see that happening. So it'll be. I think it's just going to be I don't know what the defining storyline will be. I don't think it'll be defined by the ball. I think that there will be enough offense. I don't think people are going to be. I don't think we'll be looking up at the All-Star break and saying, where did all the runs go? Because there's certainly been enough high-scoring games in the small sample size that we've got. I think it's going to be a lot of the same stuff about, analytics, and is this good for baseball, and are there too many shifts and things like that. Like, Francisco Lindor gave an interesting interview where he doesn't like to overshift, and he doesn't listen specifically to some of the analytics when it comes to playing defense, because he likes to watch the angle of the bat and watch his pitcher and just be what used to be called a gamer, in the sense that he's actually paying attention to the game. So he doesn't need to be told when to move 6 inches to the right or left. So I think it's going to be I'm optimistic. I think it'll be a really good and fun season. If the Dodgers wind up dominating, and it looks like a runaway train, I think that'll be not so great for baseball, because I think if they win it all, but it's competitive, fine. Wouldn't be the first time someone won back-to-back World Series, but I think if they wind up being so head and shoulders above both the Padres and everyone else, it'll get a little bit tedious.
Okay, well, I've got one last group of questions, and this will end it. Home runs up or down?
I'm saying, I think it's actually going to be the same. Can I say the same?
Okay. Sure. That wasn't what I asked. Sure.
The impact of the ball will just be somewhat negligible.
Okay. Runs up or down?
I think runs will be up.
Okay. Earned runs up or down?
Earned runs up or down? It's I guess I would say up, because if I'm saying runs are up, I don't think it's just going to be because of bad defense.
See, my take on it is this, and it's something brought up. Balls in play will be hit as hard, if not as harder, than ones that were out of the park. So you're going to put more emphasis on being able to field balls, because there'll be more balls in the park, but they'll be hit just as hard. Therefore, you're going to have to make more plays, and I think it's a chance for more errors. And when you start throwing in shifts and people being able to hit away from the shift, hopefully by now, I think you're going to see some more errors that we may not have seen before. So I think earned runs will be down, but runs might actually be up. but that's just my take on it. So
no, I can see the Matt.
Thank you once again, Matt. This has been a pleasure. We'll get you out of here on that. You never know.
Yeah.
You never know. Thanks again. We'll get back with you soon, and we'll make sure everyone gets a chance to see this, and we'll touch base shortly.
Thanks, Frank. Take care.
Thanks, Matt.